I was somewhat flabbergasted when they asked me to speak tonight. I tried not to show it when Evelyn broke it to me this afternoon because I enjoy much more a group of a dozen or two people who really want to dig deep into things. In the student Christian movement where I've worked all my life, that's the thing I've liked best. And I've tried to get away from the platform end of it. And so when she put it to me, I was just a little bit, flabbergasted. I guess that's the best word for it. But I had come resolved to do anything that was asked of me without question and to assume that it was His will and that it would work out all right. And so I said without any hesitation, all right, and I am here with the idea of trying to share with you something of the impact which has come in upon me from two angles. One, the world and its problems, and the other, that other world beyond our five senses, which is becoming gradually in this day and age of things which do go beyond our five senses, becoming actually the most real world. I don't know whether you have realized how much help we're getting these days from sources which we tend to think as dangerous or at least competitive, but of the 30 million books that were published last year, 25 million of them were about the world that lies beyond our five senses. Superman, Super Mouse, all kinds of supers, dealing with laws and forces quite beyond our five senses. And just think, we're having a generation of youngsters grow up familiar with the thought that we aren't limited by our sense of smell and touch and taste and sight and hearing. Not at all. And furthermore, we've got TV and radio. And if you'll think back, those of us who can think back to the period before that, prayer, what is prayer? Well, it involves some kind of communication with the unseen, without any wires up. Yes, we ought to be able to approach this whole field of prayer in a new way. The world is ready for something, and our job, as I see it, here in this camp, is to get ourselves so charged that we can go out and take it to them. And the marvelous part of it is that you don't need to be a missionary to take it to them. Literally and actually, in this modern age, any farmer's wife on a backcountry crossroads can have more power than though she were a member of Congress. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, this power which can reach out and touch the world, can meet the problems of life. Now, I've discovered that they have to meet our own personal problems, too. Some of you are here with very real personal problems. And it's come to me very definitely that the problem of the world and of ending war and bringing peace on earth is no more important in the eyes of God than that you and you and you should be healed physically, mentally, morally, and spiritually. But I've got to go back a little bit, if you'll pardon me for being somewhat personal. I want to go back to my first experience my first exposure to that kind of thing. That was when I was a student at the University of Michigan, way back before the First World War. And I was, at that time, working as the employment secretary of the University YMCA at Ann Arbor, Michigan, and a student, a junior, and they worked up a delegation to our summer conference up at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Some of you probably have been there to the Student Christian Movement conferences. Well, I was quite concerned about that conference. I felt that it was a strong one. We were going to have something for people, and I was much interested in getting the right people to go from our YMCA. But there had been another committee at work who'd gone to Detroit and raised a lot of money and then chased around the campus, lining up the big shots. We call them the BMCs, big men on the campus, who were supposed to represent the real power on the campus. And we were taking them up on this basis. Someone went to them and said, "Look here, you've had a hard year's work. You're tired. Before you go into your summer's job, why don't you come up to this wonderful resort place? Get a good rest. Oh, there'll be good talks and good conference going on, but it's a lovely place. You'll have a good time. Get a good rest." Well, they lined up about half of the delegation. 46 people were lined up to go, and about 24 of them were the presidents of the classes, senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, editor of the paper, the captain of all captains of the football, baseball, basketball team. Once the avalanche started, they all lined up, you see. You get a key man or two, and then they're all with you. And the day before we were to start, the secretary, who was supposed to be in charge, came down with appendicitis, and they had to pull it, and it left me, who'd been the student chairman, in charge of the delegation. A junior who didn't know any of these big shots, who was working his way through and wasn't very much up on the inside stuff around the campus. And here I was supposed to chair the gang. Well, we got up there and they all went to the first meeting. And then after that meeting, I discovered the third night that there had not been a single one of the big shots at a single meeting, not once, because they had discovered that right next door to our camp, there had been opened a camp for Chicago working girls. And they were girl hungry. We didn't have many girls at Michigan at that time. I went down to the lakefront shore after that meeting. I tried to pray. Now my mother, and this whole talk might be called a discussion of my mother's influence on my life. My mother had taught me one thing. That was that prayer really got things done sometimes. I knew it through her. I didn't know much about it personally, but we had been left when I was 12 years old without a father in the situation, and 4 children, and we'd had to work pretty hard. We'd had a lot of things to do, and we'd come into some pretty tough situations, and always when Mother prayed, the thing broke open. And I would find myself listening to a philosophy professor and thinking, "Look here, old man, if you knew my mother, I wonder if you'd say that." You see, I had a little different frame of reference from his. And over and over, I found myself going back to that, but somehow it didn't hit me personally. And then came this thing. And I went down to the lakefront. Oh, I'd prayed, but I don't know as I'd ever really tested this thing out on others. And I tried to pray for that gang. Well, it didn't pray. It just didn't go. I could look around me and I could see that there wasn't any ceiling down where the lake, but it didn't touch anything real anywhere within me or in the universe. And I'd get disgusted, and I'd start back to my tent, and then I'd think, well, I can't sleep if I go there, because I was disturbed. I really was disturbed. It was partly pride, I imagine. I didn't want to fail under an assignment. But I remember, too, that I did very definitely feel concerned about those fellows. I wanted them to get what was being offered. It was real. And I wanted the campus to get it. I cared. And I gave myself to it. And yet, just a blank. And I walked back and forth. And an hour passed, and 2 hours, and 3 hours. And I tried to quit, and I couldn't. The burden was too heavy on me. And finally, I saw that it was beginning to get light in the east. And then, all of a sudden, I knew. Just as clearly, there was no flash of light, there was no voice, but there came to me a sense of certainty. It was all right. I went up to my tent and went to sleep, and had a couple hours good sleep, got up, went to breakfast feeling fine, and just after breakfast, the editor of the paper, who was really the leader of that BMC gang, came to me, said, Frank, I have the feeling that we haven't been playing fair by this thing. And I could tell he was feeling differently because I think it was the first time he'd been to breakfast. But he said, if you don't mind, I'll quote his exact words because they stick with me as having been very, very sweet music. He said, do you mind if I round up the gang and give them hell? I didn't mind. He rounded them up. And the interesting thing was that when we got them together, he didn't have to give any pep talk. They were all feeling as he was. And they knuckled down to take that conference seriously. And when we were finished the last day and we had our delegation meeting, every single man in turn got up and said, you know, this has meant an awful lot to me, and I'm going to be worth more on the campus. Now, I went way back there to tell that. It almost seems like talking about somebody else. It was so long ago. Because I want to show you how that idea got away from me time after time. I'm talking about prayer, but in that the power of prayer is what we want to find here. But I also am talking about the problem of keeping the power of prayer, because it's all one thing. I had that experience and I didn't repeat it for years. I use prayer more for personal things, and I got help. I was for 2 years in Russia during that First World War, serving under the Army YMCA in Moscow during the Bolshevik Revolution. Traveled for thousands of miles with Bolshevik soldiers and sailors, heavily armed, no officers, no discipline. I could have been liquidated any time. And I was able during that period to keep a spirit of brotherhood and goodwill that was real enough so that in all of those miles with those Russian soldiers and sailors, often toward the last I was carrying $40,000 of Russian and American money mixed, an emergency fund to get part of our group out if it came to a crisis, and I never lost a thing. Of all the people in the world, I honestly think that the Russians are most responsive to a spirit of goodwill and brotherhood. That's what John R. Mott, the great missionary student Christian movement head, whose still active after all these years. That's what he said repeatedly, that Russia was the most sensitive people in the world spiritually. And I wish we could come back to that as we face the problem of praying for the Russians, for we're going to face that while we're up here. This power I'm talking about is something that isn't abstract. It applies to that pain in your tummy, and it applies to that pain in the world, which is Korea, or China, or Iran. I didn't use it much for others during that period, consciously, but I must have used it unconsciously on those Russians, or I wouldn't be here. I remember one night I got onto a freight car late at night and woke up the next morning to find that two of the men with whom I had become friendly before I went to sleep had sat up all night with drawn revolvers to protect me from the group at the other end of the car with whom I had not become acquainted. Another hour or two, and I needed no protection because I had shared the spirit of brotherhood with those at the other end. Oh, I suppose I used it, and yet somehow it wasn't something which was real and tangible to me. And then I came back from Russia and went to Penn State as Secretary of the Y and found a group of ex-soldiers mostly who were facing this whole question of the place of religion. They'd found a good many people, went overseas, who had a good religious background and found themselves with people who had no religious background. And they couldn't see much difference between them when it came right down to whether a bullet respected them or not, or to suffering or anything else. They said, we all prayed in the tight places, and one man's prayer seemed to have as little or as much value as another's. They said, if this religion is real, we ought to use it. If it's not real, we ought to throw it away. They said, let's test it, just as we'd test anything in the laboratory. Well, how can you test it? Now, this went on from September through until around Thanksgiving time. Every Sunday night, after the girls' dorm closed at 10 o'clock, the boys would gather in the Y office in the old main building. And we didn't have to watch the watch. We stopped when we were through, whether it was 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock. But it went on over hours and hours. I'm condensing it. They said, let's test it as we'd test a solution in the laboratory to see whether it's acid or alkali. Let's test it by use. Someone said, you can't, because the heart of religion is prayer, and you can't test prayer because you've got to always say, if it be thy will. Yes, they said after a few more hours of discussion. Yes, but there is one area where we can be dead certain sure of God's will. If Jesus is right, and they were willing to start on that basis, if there was anything right, it ought to be there. Then, they said, it's God's will that every man and woman gain a greater sense of brotherhood. And out of that, they felt sure would come a sense of God's reality as a Father. Well, it ended by their each taking the most unsocial person they knew and starting to pray 20 minutes every morning. That is to spend 20 minutes in reading their testament and trying to get into the mood to pray, and then in actually praying for that person. Well, I think there were 15 who started the process. I believe it was 3 who gave it up as a bad job after 2 or 3 weeks and said frankly they couldn't hold the pace. At the end of the year, the 3 people whom they had selected showed no change that was observable to anybody. The 12 people who had picked folk and prayed for them throughout the year, without exception, were so changed that there was comment on it from those who were around them. No one was told that this was going on. The person who was being prayed for didn't know. And none of their associates knew. It was something kept within the group very strictly. In some instances, I was the only one who knew who the person was for whom that particular student was praying. Just a couple of instances. In one case, a freshman picked the president of his fraternity house, who had been elected by crooked politics to the office of president and was known as the most clever cheater in examinations, cribber, on the campus. Well, a freshman doesn't have much contact with a senior or much influence, you know. And yet, before the year was over, the senior came to the freshman, talked the whole thing over, ended by resigning as president, and led or helped to lead a clean-up movement to put the honor system into operation again. Another fellow took a chap who was terribly morose and sullen, unfriendly. He roomed in the same house with him. Everybody in the house talked it over. They said, well, let's keep saying good morning to him, even though he never answered. And this fellow went through until Easter, praying every morning for that chap. And he came to me then and he says, you know, there's nothing to this prayer business. There hasn't been a sign of recognition on the part of that chap. He still doesn't answer my greeting. He's never looked at me. He's never noticed me in any way. He says, what's the use? This just doesn't work. But he talked himself finally into going on to the end of the year, because he'd agreed to, and classes were finished and examinations were underway, and he was studying at midnight one night when there came a knock on the door, and in came this chap. And with a few of the characteristic Army O's, which mean so little to a man whose vocabulary has absorbed them, he said, I don't know why I'm coming to you, but he said, I've got to talk to somebody, and you seem the best bet. And you know, there's a law there. When you pray for somebody, there's something forms in the universe to meet their needs. Often it's in the one who prays. And there's a sense of need forms in them. And the two come together just as naturally as dust flows into a vacuum cleaner. And that was what had happened. The story came out. He'd been the son of a Methodist, was the son of a Methodist minister in a fairly prominent city church. He'd gotten a girl in trouble, ran away from it, enlisted in the Army under an assumed name, and hadn't let his parents hear from him from that time on. Forgotten it, it must have been 2.5, 3 years or longer. And he read in the hometown paper that his father had been sent to a country church as reward for taking the girl and the baby into the family and taking care of them. The upshot of the night was that before morning they prayed together, and the fellow resolved to go ahead and get his degree the next week and to go back and try to win the love of the girl again and marry her. I went to Colorado School of Mines then as interdenominational representative, representing 4 national church boards of education and the Student Christian Association. The School of Mines had a reputation, that had a tradition that they could always get their man. If they decided to oust a member of the faculty or anyone related to the school, they never had failed to come through and kick him out. My predecessor had been removed in that way. And first year went fine. Things opened up. We had the just naturally, because he was interested, the biggest athlete on the campus, a fellow who made 17 letters in athletics during his college course, came in and became president. But the second year, there suddenly developed an organized opposition that we just couldn't put our fingers on. Everything that we tried to do went wrong, and there was nothing we could do about it. We didn't know what was up, and it finally ended by this athlete and myself and 3 other students meeting every morning for prayer. That's all we could do, was to pray about it. Before the year was out, this college, where they never failed to get their man when they were organized or that kind of thing, had started a vigilante committee in the conventional fashion with members from every fraternity and boarding house to put me out. And before the year was over, every single member of that committee had come in and apologized, either to our president or to me. Said they were sorry and they'd get back to the why. Well, the next year, the State Legion took it up. And funny, we never even thought of praying for them. I don't know why. They were too remote, I guess. But things were riding all right, and the Denver papers were full of this trouble. Finally, the trustees of the school took it up. This is just incidental, and discovered that all of the trouble had been started by a former president who had been crooked and been removed, and he was trying to make trouble for the present president in order that there might be hopes of his getting back in again. And the whole thing had been a political move on his part, and we didn't realize quite what was going on until it was all over. But the point was that we found that prayer worked in a situation that seemed in the mass as difficult as anything you could imagine. Because this was the school of mines where their alma mater, that they sacred hymn they stand up and take off their hats to, was "I wish I had a barrel of rum and sugar 300 pound, the college bell to mix it in, the clapper to stir it round. Like every honest fellow, I take my whiskey clear, I'm a rambling Rex in golden text, a mining engineer." Other schools sing that song, but for that was their alma mater. Well, those things happen. I went to New York City and had charge of the college summer service group. Among other things, summers, winters, I had charge of the New York University Christian Association down on Washington Square in the Greenwich Village section. Had a great many chances there to test prayer, to get people to test prayer. Without exception, the results were positively convincing. Here's a fellow who wanted to try it out. He went to a settlement house and said, "I want the toughest assignment you got." "You mean it?" "I certainly do." "Well, okay, you asked for it. We'll give you such and such a club." They just beat up their last leader. 7 out of 12 of them are on probation from the police department. You can have them. Take them. He went for 3 months. He was quite a baseball man, and he used all of the tricks he knew. He studied educational psychology, and he used all of that. At the end of 3 months, he hadn't gained any ground. Well, he brought it to the group, which was studying this prayer question. And he said, "Guess I'm licked." "Well, have you prayed about it?" "Well, yes, I pray every night before I go to bed." "Well, how do you pray?" "Well, I mention it in my prayers, the club." Well, it ended by his getting a different idea of prayer, and he set aside 2 hours before he was to meet them the next time. And he went and got alone. And he tried to throw his life open to the presence of God. Now, that's not an easy thing for a young fellow who's active. He said he had a terrible time getting his body out of the way in the first place, just getting comfortable, and where he could forget his muscles. And then he said his mind, oh, how the wheels kept going round. He kept thinking, and he had to quiet that mind. Finally, the still small voice came. He said, for the first time in his life, he knew what that meant, and he said he had a tremendous certainty within him that something had happened to him and that he had enlarged out literally into the life of those boys, and something had happened to them. And he went over and met them, and they were different, absolutely different. Within a week, the settlement house said, what's happened to this outfit? They're different. And 3 months later, every boy was off probation, back in school, or at a job as he should be. Well, I could go on. A school teacher, for example. A girl who we'd placed for the summer in the Henry Street settlement, and she'd done such wonderful things with the Lower East Side youngsters, that they got her a job as a teacher in a school for mental defectives. She'd done it in the settlement house by just praying for them. Every morning she'd bring up this group she was working with into the presence of God and just love them there. And they changed. And she made a tremendous impression on that Henry Street settlement staff. And they recommended her for this job, which was considered a great privilege because this was a very wealthy school. It went to Florida in the winter and up in Westchester County in the summer. And it was considered a great compliment that she was given the privilege to go there, for she just graduated from Mississippi State College for Women, I believe it was. And she came to see me a couple months later. I remember we met up in the Grand Central Station. She only had a short time, and we sat there, and she poured out her story. She was breaking physically, just a nervous wreck. She looked as though she'd lost 25 pounds. She said, I can't reach those children. I just can't reach them. She said, I've read every book I could get hold of. I sit up till midnight every night and study, and I can't reach those children. Well, the school was satisfied. She was doing as well as anybody else. They wanted her to stay on and go to Florida with them. But she said she didn't know as her health would stand it, and she ought to break her contract. They were willing to let her if she wanted, because they could get someone else as good. But she was just average in their sight. But I finally said, have you ever tried the method you used at Henry Street? Why, she said, these are mental defectives. But I said, are they responsive to love? Oh, yes. They're just suffering for affection. Well, I said, what is prayer but love? She sat there for a few moments. Oh, she said, I see. And she gave up her late studying, approaching it through the intellectual route. Maybe what she'd gotten helped, but she got up early in the morning and began to love those youngsters, went to Florida with them. And the next June, the trustees of the school called her in. They said, the head of this school is retiring in a couple of years, and we want you to study and take over that job from her. Because they said, never in the history of this school has anyone even begun to get the kind of results that you have gotten in this last semester of teaching. Oh, we had positive results over and over. And then came the Second World War. I've got to cut this awfully short because I know you're tired, and I'm not going to hold you here after you're supposed to go, although we were late in getting started. But the war came on, and I had seen enough of the method of settling disputes through armed processes, the revolution, the fighting in Russia and all the rest, and the disillusionment coming back, so that for me, the war method had become a sin, impossible. And I found myself so completely certain that it was wrong, for me at least, that I would have to protest in some way. And the first chance I had to get was to refuse to register. And I was arrested and fingerprinted and all the rest. We were never actually prosecuted, the 4 or 5 of us in the New York City of my age group, because they never called us for service, and they finally decided they wouldn't prosecute except for refusal to serve. But I resigned from the Christian Association and went to work, working among the conscientious objectors in the civilian public service camps. And to me, that setup was wrong. Here were the Quakers. I'd married into a Quaker family, and my thinking was more and more along those lines, my religious approach. And here were Quakers, directors of these camps, compelled to go to court and give the testimony which would put some fellow in prison, possibly for 5 years, because the fellow found that the kind of work he was given wasn't satisfying his conscience. And he would walk out as a protest and call up the FBI and said, "Here's where you'll find me, come and get me." And the Quaker director of that camp would have to go and give the testimony that would put that man in prison. They didn't mean it that way, but it turned out that the historic peace churches, as they call the Quakers, the Mennonites, and the Brethren, were really helping to run a conscription law. And I found myself fighting it with my mind. And some way I got swept completely away. Well, not completely, no, I still had the words, but I'd lost the tune of the spirit approach. And when you work on the level of the mind, here's the body down here, here's the mind, and here's another level up here. When you've worked on this level and not tried that, your mind's a pretty good tool, serves you well. But if you get up there, and then you try to drop down here, boy, it doesn't work. Your mind has learned to depend on a higher wisdom. Channels have been opened to heaven to guide it, and it doesn't know how to get along otherwise. And when you drop down here, you don't stop there. You go on. And I found myself fighting all over again battles that I thought had been settled on a physical level. And, moreover, I found myself feeling that, well, I understood the 7 devils who come back in after one has been cast out? If nothing takes the place of what was there, if the house is left empty. Well, I found myself understanding that all too well. And I went to my first CFO camp at that point, just with an axe to grind. I went to this CFO camp because I had been told that they were interested in world peace, and they ought to know about these conscientious objectors. So I went to tell them. Went up to Winnie in 1945, and I never will forget that experience. I learned afterwards that out of something over 300, only 75 of them had ever been to a CFO camp before. That we were all practically new, like myself. And I also can see now that you see other people almost as though they were a mirror. Other people reflect what we are, very definitely. And boy, as that crowd got off the train and scrapped for the first places on the first buses and got to the inn and scrapped over the best rooms, and honestly, I was just so certain that no Glenn Clark or anything else could do anything with that bunch of hopeless old fogies that, you see, we were all gray-headed. Almost all the young people were tied up in the war in some way or other. And I was just hopeless. And but I decided I'd go through it, and I'd expose myself. And I remember my first rhythm mating. I felt like a cow. I hope Marcia reads you about the cow while she's here. Yes, I finger painted, and I went through everything. There were some things I couldn't stomach. I remember Ruth Robinson was giving an afternoon on healing, and I stuck my head in the door, and I thought, I'm glad I don't have to go to that. And I never went back. And Rufus, I think, was there that year, and I slipped into the back seat. I stood it for about 3 minutes, and then I slipped out. I didn't go back there anymore. But I took most of it very well. And about the 4th or 5th day, I suddenly woke up to find that faces were changing, that there was a spirit of love and goodwill there. Now, I'd set up lots of conferences. I thought I knew something about them. And I never saw anything like that happen in a conference. I found myself really feeling that I understood for the first time the phrase, the kingdom of heaven. Because here was goodwill. Here was love. Here was brotherhood, sisterhood, in a marvelous fashion. And I've been studying ever since to find out what that method is, you see. I've become convinced that this kind of power which I had touched and which others had touched can be held onto if you recapture it every day. The trouble with me in the early beginning was that I didn't understand this was something you had to recapture day by day. I can go back over those people who had the experiences in the power of prayer. Almost none of them have kept it up. They've lost it. Why? Because I didn't make clear to them that this was something which had to be reborn within us day by day. We had to pay a price to live in that world. But I've learned since that if you pay that price, that power is so great that it not only cures disease, but it cures world problems. I think it's impossible now for there to be a third world war. It is being stopped by the prayers which have been developed largely through the camps farthest out. That is literally and actually true. And just one more brief illustration to show you what I mean by saying that there is no difference in God's sight between the need of an individual and a world need. We organized in Washington a prayer group. I believe some of the members of that group are here. The first group which met had 6 men and 6 women in it. They weren't husbands and wives all, but I remember they just happened to come out that way. And those of us who organized it had just one purpose. That was to develop prayer for the President and his cabinet and for Congress. We prayed about other things somewhat, but that was the thing we were most interested in, those of us who were pushing it. We met out at the house on Cedar Street in Washington. And gradually, as that prayer group moved along, we found ourselves gaining a sense of power because things began to happen. And then one day, the rector of the church where Lois Owings, who was a member of the group, was attending, called her up and said, "You told me about this prayer group of yours. I'm desperately eager to get some kind of house. Do you suppose you could get him to pray for?" And he mentioned a couple and their little boy, who were the couple young people, very active in his church. And the little boy, their only child, 4 or 5 years old, had just been told, the parents had just been told by the doctors, that he had spotted fever, which develops from a tick bite, and that nobody had ever lived who had reached the point which he had reached. Temperature up above 106, kidneys locked, couldn't take liquid of any kind. And they just frankly told the parents there's no hope. And the parents had told the rector. And the rector, who is a man of great faith but had had little experience in this kind of thing, turned for help to this prayer group. And Lois called up, I think it was 7 of us she got, 7 or 8, and she said, let's all tune in at 7 o'clock tonight, this was just before supper, for this little boy. And we did. I, for one, had a very real experience. She didn't tell Matt Acton, the rector, what time we were praying, but he went to the hospital at 7 o'clock. The father said no change. They say he won't last through the night. Nat went on to see someone else in the hospital, and when he came back 20 minutes later, the father saw him coming and came running to meet him. Said, oh, he's just asked for a drink of water and taken it. And the boy, when that was 2 or 3 years ago, and the boy went on, got well, and is back in school. We were sort of shocked to have a prayer like that answered. It's startling. But I tell you what, it did something for us in our praying for Truman and for Joe Stalin and for Mao and China and all the rest of them. It put power into our prayers. And it made me, for one, realize, as I had never realized before, that there's no difference in God's sight between the need of that little boy and the need of a Harry Truman. Harry Truman is sick with responsibility too heavy for him to bear. Harry Truman has got to learn the secret of shifting that sack from his shoulder over to the shoulder of Jesus. He's got to learn to tap the wisdom of God. And then there'll be a way out. And Joe Stalin studied for the priesthood, became just torn to pieces by the plight of the peasants, those ignorant, downtrodden peasants under the despotic rule of the Tsar, and finally began to work for them, secret work against the Tsar's government. He was of the privileged group, you see, moving into the priesthood. And this thing of human need captivated him. And he began to risk his life for it. Was sent to Siberia repeatedly, was in Siberia when the Bolshevik Revolution came along and liberated him. He's done terrible things. So have you and I. Does God forgive us? Does the spark of the divine die within us because we have done that which is evil? It's all wiped out the minute we turn to him. Everything is gone in the past. We can forget it. And Joe Stalin can. There's something to build on there. I hope in these days when the ceasefire negotiations are blocked and everything is hanging fire in the world, waiting for a push. In fact, I'm convinced this camp can learn to pray and to love so that we give that push right from this camp. Power so great, the power of atomic energy is nothing compared with the power of the Spirit, the atomic energy of the Spirit. That's what we're here for, to learn how to release that. And it's going to be a wonderful week. Let us pray together. Dear Father, you've given us Jesus. He's told us all the secrets we need to know. We ask now that you give us ears to hear. Quicken that spark within us until it grows until your life within us becomes the real self. We won't have to give up any will. Your will and ours become the same because your life and ours become one. Oh, help us to grow up, to claim our full maturity, to become your sons and daughters and your partners in this great business of bringing your kingdom here on earth, your will to be done here as it is in heaven. Through Jesus, in his presence, with him, we pray. Amen.